First things first, before we start talking about strategies and techniques, I want to talk about time in general. It's important to recognize and remember that time is a finite resource. We get 24 hours in a day, that's it. But we have different personalities, experiences, circumstances, and skills. There's not a right way to do things, but there's a right way for you. And we're going to find it. So what does this all mean in a practical sense? It means that if we've got too much going on, we either need to do less or do what we're doing more efficiently. For most people, it's a combination of both. However, because I'm going to spend the rest of this course talking about the ways to use time more efficiently, I want to take a moment to talk about doing less. I'm sure you've heard the advice that you should get better at saying no. And I know that's really hard. There are really only two aspects to reducing what's on our plate. What we're doing now, that we don't want to be doing, and what we're going to say yes to or no to in the future. First, let's talk about adding more stuff to our lives. Most of us say yes without thinking about it a lot of the time. We feel pressure to say yes, to be liked, to be helpful, because it seems like a good thing to do or something that we should do. But we're not always thinking about our time and priorities. And that's often how we get stretched to think. So the first thing is just take a breath and don't say yes immediately. Say you'll need to look at your schedule and get back to them and then sleep on it. Then you want to ask yourself, is this a heck yes situation? And if it's not, then say no. And if it is a heck yes situation, then you want to think to yourself, if this were tomorrow, would this still be a heck yes? And if not, say no. And finally, look at your priorities and your schedule. If it's a heck yes, and you'll do it in a heartbeat tomorrow, do you actually have time for this? And if you don't have time, is it? It's important enough that you replace something else you are doing. If not, it's still a no. There are some situations like your boss assigning you a project, where it's much more difficult to say no. I'm not talking about those situations here. I'm talking about the things that are not actually obligatory. Sometimes we think it's selfish to say no, but in fact, it's much better for everyone that you say no to something that you might feel resentful of when the time actually comes to do it. So those are the steps that you can take when you're being asked to add something new to your plate. Now the next piece of the puzzle is reducing what's on our plate today. Another way to think about this is, what am I doing right now that I really don't want to be doing, that I wish I had said no to, or that just isn't working for me anymore? There are ways to reduce these obligations too. You can extract yourself gracefully, of course, or you can delegate to or outsource. The first step to reducing what's on your plate already is to take stock of all your obligations and to figure out how to remove those things that you're no longer deriving value from. Next, you'll complete an activity that will help you do exactly that. As I mentioned previously, a great way to start managing your time is to figure out if there are any responsibilities that you can take off your plate. This activity will help you think about the obligations that you can remove from your life and how. This activity should take between 5 and 10 minutes, depending on how many obligations you can think of to remove. To get started, download the worksheet attached to this lecture and take a minute or two to think about all of your obligations and how they make you feel. What are the things you dread going to or doing? Now on the worksheet, write down at least 2 obligations, but more if you can, that you'd rather or not in your life. For example, maybe you signed up to be a room parent in your kids' class, and it's really more of a time sucker than you thought. Maybe you're on a committee at work that was valuable to you and others at one point, but just isn't anymore. Maybe it's something around the house that you just can't stand doing. Maybe it's even a person, a relationship that is dragging you down and not serving you anymore. But whatever it is, write it down. Then think about the action that you can take to remove this obligation from your life. There are really 3 ways to do this. First, you can extract yourself by discussing the obligation with whoever is in charge on the other end. You want to do this gracefully and with empathy. If you made a commitment for a particular amount of time, you'll probably want to keep your commitment and then just not sign up again. For instance, if it's being a wrong parent, you'll probably need to wait for the end of the semester. If it's a committee at work or a volunteer position, go to talk to the person in charge and explain why it doesn't make sense for you anymore, and create an exit plan together. Next, you can delegate. If you have direct reports at work where it might make sense for them to take over a duty, that can be an option. You can delegate housework to your kids or your partner. And finally, if it's within your budget, you can outsource. Maybe you can find a way to get a house cleaner once a month, or pay for translation services instead of translating that document yourself. Maybe you can even do a swap with a friend. You do the chore they hate, and then you do the chore you hate. When you've brainstormed a few obligations and thought about how to remove them, put a realistic timeline around it. When you have this conversation or do the research on service providers, really think about this and be realistic. You want an actionable plan that you can commit to. At the end of the activity, you'll come away with an action plan to help you free up time in your life so that you can spend that time on something you really want to do. Let's get to it. We'll spend the bulk of these sections in this course building your own personalized productivity system. However, before we get there, I want to take a step back and look at the reasons why we feel overwhelmed, stressed, and stretched thin in the first place. I believe there are three major reasons why we struggle with time management and productivity. 1, attempting to rely on our memories. 2, not having a system for our tasks and to-dos. And 3, distractions and focus struggles. In this lecture, I want to talk about why we should not rely on our memories. At first, this probably sounds counterintuitive. Aren't our memories a good thing? Don't people pride themselves on having great memories? So yes, our memories can be very powerful tools, but it shouldn't be the place that we store all of that stuff that we have to do. Attempting to use our memories to keep track of what we need to do isn't very effective, and it actually increases stress. We want to use our brains for thinking about and focusing on the task at hand, not for remembering that you need to pick up the mail or call back your mom or write that report for your boss. If you sometimes feel like you're not present at work or at home or even on the phone, it's often because our brains are working overtime trying to hang on to all that stuff that we know we have to do. And when our brains are trying to hold on to all that stuff, it's very hard to focus on the present. Imagine this all too common scenario. Your partner or your roommate texts you in the middle of the day and asks you to pick up some milk on your way home. No big deal. And you say okay. And then you store that in your memory. An hour later, you're writing an email when a thought pops into your brain. Got to remember the milk. You're momentarily distracted from what you're doing, and it takes a while to get back into it. 2 hours later, you're in an important meeting with your boss, and that same thought pops into your brain. Remember the milk. Now, we've just missed the last thing that our boss said. I really hope it wasn't important. In any case, I think you get where I'm going here. Our memories are not a great place to keep track of all that stuff that we have to do. When we get all of this stuff out of our heads and into our system, we're able to use our brains in the moment on the thing that we're actually trying to do instead of getting stuck in either the future or the past. So it may seem like very simple and maybe a little old school advice. I'm going to suggest that you start writing it all down. The little stuff, the big stuff, all of it. As soon as you need to do something and it pops into your brain, write it down. The format doesn't really matter as long as it's easy and convenient for you. You may choose a notes app on your phone, a Google Doc, even a physical notebook that you carry around with you. The important thing is to get all of this stuff out of your head and into an external place where you know that you won't lose it and you can access it whenever you need it. Once the to-dos are out of your head, your brain actually starts to relax and to focus. So let go of that notion that you have to have a good memory and that you don't need to write things down. It's not a badge of honor, it is actually making you less effective and more stressed. Even when you actually do remember it all, so write it down. Now you know that relying on memory is not the most effective way to manage all the things that you have to do. And I bet you're thinking, if I'm not supposed to rely on my memory, then what exactly am I supposed to do? The answer is that you have to have a system outside of your head where you can keep track of all of your tasks, your projects, your open questions, all of that stuff. Not having a system or not using a system that you already set up is the second common roadblock to managing your time effectively. So what do I mean by a system? Well, that's going to be a bit different for every person. But at its core, a system is a method for capturing, organizing, prioritizing, and documenting your tasks. It will be a method that you use consistently to achieve consistent results and ensure that you know with certainty that you are not spending the right amount of time on the right things. When you don't have a system, things fall through the cracks. You have a lot of input sources these days. We've still got all the old inputs like snail mail, phone calls, face-to-face meetings, some office systems that have a fax machine. But we've got a lot of new inputs too. We have email, we have messaging apps like Slack and WhatsApp, we have texts. Sure, stuff is coming to us from many directions. And if we don't have a way to catch it all, categorize it and prioritize it, not only do we start to feel overwhelmed fast, but we start to miss things. Creating a system that works for you and filtering all of your inputs through it is one of the best ways that you can take back control of your time and ensure that you are on top of it all. So we've talked about not relying on our memories and not using a system. And that brings us to a huge roadblock to productivity: distractions and lack of focus. I think anyone who works in a modern office, and especially in an open office, can do this right here. Whether it's the email notifications dinging all day long, that coworker who just doesn't appear to have an inside voice, or a new hire that still needs a ton of support. Distractions are all around us all the time. A recent study out of UC Irvine shows that it takes an average of 23 minutes, that's minutes, not seconds, to refocus after an interruption. And that holds true even when we are distracting ourselves. Say when we decide to check our email in the middle of writing a big report. 23 minutes. Think about that. An average work day, 8 hours, breaks down into about 21 periods of 22 minutes. Are you distracted more than 20 times a day? No wonder you're having trouble focusing and getting everything done. Distractions are a huge issue. We live in an age of technology, and technology is wonderful in so many ways. But it also feeds off of our ability to be distracted. We have to be more mindful and purposeful to minimize distractions. If we want to improve our time management and skills and get more out of the time that we have. Not only will your productivity system help you focus, but later on we'll also be talking about several very specific techniques that we can use to minimize distraction around us so that we can remain focused. Next, we'll do an activity that will help to define where we see the biggest roadblocks in ourselves. Remember, everyone is different. Over the last few lectures, we've talked about 3 primary categories of roadblocks that affect our ability to manage our time and be as productive as possible. Now it's time for an activity that will help us to reflect on our own personal struggles with productivity. To start, download the worksheet associated with this lecture. Then think about your typical day. What are the roadblocks to your own time management, productivity, that you feel are affecting you most frequently or are the most detrimental? What have you found yourself saying over and over that you'd likely to get better at? What delays your day or sends you off course? To learn more about the worksheet, place a check mark next to those items that apply to you, and feel free to add your own in the blank spaces. Be honest here. No one will judge you. This is just for you. Throughout the course, I want you to reflect on this list as we learn about new skills about time management and think about how the strategies, techniques, tips, and hacks can be implemented so that you can work to reduce and even eliminate those roadblocks that flag you most. The next section will be diving into how who you are affects which strategies work for you and which don't. So we've talked about common roadblocks to productivity, and we've also honed in on those roadblocks that affect us most personally. And now we're going to dive deeper into personalization. Each person is different. We have different ways of thinking. We have different circumstances, different constraints, different bodies, and different brains. And who we are as people can affect our productivity. It is much easier to build a system around who we are already, what our core tendencies are naturally, than it is to force who we are into an already existing system. We don't want to attempt to shove a square peg into a round hole. We want to build something that fits you. There's a reason that there's so many different productivity books, apps, methods, and ideas out there, each one of them planning to be the silver bullet. And they probably are the silver bullet for whoever came up with it in the first place. But everything is not going to work out for every single person. It's necessary to tweak, to adjust, and to iterate, and sometimes even to just throw out a strategy that's not working for you. Humans will always find it easier to stick with something if it is both easy and convenient for them. So I'm going to help you build a system that conforms to your lifestyle and your work style. That said, I do want to spend a minute talking about habit building. At its core, a habit is something that you don't have to think about doing, and habit is a neutral word. There are good habits and there are bad habits. Studies show that up to 40% of our daily actions are actually fueled by habit. But I'm sure you know that habits are often failed and difficult to break. And humans with a need for immediacy, we often throw in the towel when we're trying something new before our brains have even had the chance to build a habit. So throughout this course, you're going to be learning about techniques, strategies, tips, and tricks, and you're going to be able to choose from them to build your own system. But just because something seems like it will work with your natural tendencies, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to come easily. Building a habit is just that. It's a construction process that takes time. Study shows that on average it takes between 21 and 66 days to build a new habit. And remember, you build the habit when you're doing something without thinking about it. So you're going to try new things and you're going to fail, that I guarantee. And then I'm going to ask you to cut yourself some slack and keep going. Try again, begin the day after, and then in a few weeks or a couple of months, a consistent practice, the habit should be built. So how do you know when the habit is built? This is a really interesting question, but I like to think of it like this. You know when a habit is built when you no longer feel good about doing the thing when you do it, but you do feel bad when you miss it. So most people have a habit of brushing our teeth twice in the day. Let's hope. And I'm pretty sure that you don't give yourself a pat on the back every time you brush your teeth. But do you feel a bit guilty when you forget to brush your teeth at the end of a long day? You bet. That's a habit. So none of this is rocket science. But these practices do take diligent and consistent work. As they say, what's common sense is not always common practice. The next lesson will dive into some specific tendencies and talk about how to use who you are already to maximize your time, management, and productivity. In the remainder of the lectures in this session, we're going to be talking about strategies that work well with different characteristics or natural tendencies. First, let's talk about chronotype. Chronotype is just a fancy word for body clock. Your chronotype describes when your body and brain are awake, asleep, energetic, or lethargic. The most common dichotomy here is a morning person, often referred to as a lark, versus a night person, often referred to as an owl. If you don't know what your chronotype is, or you want to double check, there's a quiz linked to this lecture that you can take. Now let's just get it out of the open. We live in a world that is primarily designed for morning people. Work starts early, school starts early, and I'm sure you've heard the advice to get a jump on your day by waking up at 5 a.m. or get up before the rest of your family so that you can have a little alone time. There's also a lot of advice out there suggesting that it's possible to change your chronotype. But attempting to become a morning person is a strategy that rarely ever works in the long term, and it causes an awful lot of internal strife and guilt. So we can't really change our body clocks. But what we can do instead is to try to maximize how we spend our time based on what our natural body clock is telling us. We want to work with our body clock instead of against it. A huge piece of the productivity pie is about removing obstacles for ourselves. We want to make things easy and convenient so that they take less time and less effort, and so that we reduce stress. Productivity is often about getting out of our own way. Let's talk about morning people first. If you're a true morning person, a person who wakes up early without an alarm, who never gets this quiz, who jumps out of bed raring to go ready to start your day, then by all means keep doing exactly what you're doing. Wake up early and jump on the day. If you're not getting enough time for yourself, go ahead and get up a little bit earlier because your body is comfortable being awake in the morning. Take advantage of your early energy and get your exercise out of the way. The world is designed for early risers, and you're very, very lucky to be one of them. But I bet there are many of you watching right now for whom waking up is generally the hardest part of your day. In fact, study shows that the percentage of early risers is only somewhere around a third of all people. That means the majority of us are decidedly not morning people. The world isn't built for us. So we've got to do a bit more work and self-advocating to build systems that are more in line with our night owl nature. So if you're not a morning person, I want to give you some tips for surviving and thriving as an owl in a lax word. Manage your energy levels. We all have points in the day when our minds are clearer and more focused. Learn what those times are for you. When do you lag? When do you yawn? When are you energetic? As much as possible, try to structure your day and work so that you're able to match your tasks to your energy levels. And if you're lagging, then figure out what you need to do to get back in the focus zone. Take a walk, take a nap, have a healthy snack, and if you can't, then work on your more brainless tasks when your energy levels are low. Find a job within the right hours. Try to find a job with flexible hours. Obviously, this is a privileged place to be in. That I recognize. Or freelance so that you can work on your own time. If that's not possible, try to find a job with nighttime hours, like bartender, chef, etc. Lobby and boss for flexibility. Let your boss know what's going on with what's best for you, and that she'll get better work out of you, but she lets you manage your own hours. If you aren't good with people in the morning, try to avoid early morning meetings. If you're most creative between 10 p.m. and midnight, ask your boss to let you do your thinking work there, and come in a bit later in the mornings. Minimize your morning routine. All of the tics that I just mentioned are all well and good, but sometimes we're just in the situation we are in. And there's a lot we can do to change it. So if you've got to get up early to be at work at a certain time, then do whatever you can to minimize your morning routine. You're going to want to shower, pack your lunch, pick your outfit all at night. Make packing go breakfast free. Minimize or even forgo your wake up routine. And lastly, don't feel shame. Don't worry if you can't always get up early with intention. Refuse to feel that your inability to cheaper in the morning is a personal feeling. Sleep is super important, and unfortunately, it's our bodies that decide when it's best to do it. By prioritizing your sleep and working with your body instead of against it can be a huge productivity booster. We're able to get more done and ward off procrastination when we have energy. And without sleep, our energy and our brains suffer. Once you embrace your personal chronotype and learn to work with it instead of against it, you'll be more productive. And dare I say, happier. Your learning style is simply the way that your brain best processes information, and knowing your learning style and using that knowledge is a great way to boost your productivity. There are 3 basic learning styles: visual, auditory, and tactile, which is sometimes called kinetic. And you might have some tendencies from each, but skew more towards one. You probably remember learning about your learning style at some point in school, and it was likely related to how you should study. But the way we process information is important at work also, and in other parts of our adult lives. If you are able to tailor your work style to your learning style, then you'll be able to process information more efficiently, leading to greater productivity. And it's going to be easier to get into that flow state we all desire when we're processing info in the method that our brains like best. Like a lot of aspects of productivity, the easier and more convenient we can make it on ourselves, the more productive we can be. We want to remove the barriers for ourselves. Associated with this lecture is a link to a quiz to help you figure out your predominant learning style. You might want to pause here to take the quiz and make the rest of this lecture more meaningful. Now, either you just took the quiz or you already have a pretty good idea of what your learning style is. So what does this mean in practice? What can we actually do to use our learning style to advantage, to better manage our time and increase productivity? If you are a visual learner, you can print out documents or presentations and take them with you to meetings, so that you can follow along easily and write notes. This is wasteful, I know, but we can recycle the paper. Do video chats instead of video calls. Work in a quiet space with the door closed if possible. Remove visual clutter from your environment. Brainstorm on paper or whiteboard. Now, if you are an auditory learner, I've got different suggestions. Close your eyes while you're on the phone so that you can listen to the words without distraction. Repeat something you need to remember out loud. Listen to music or to white noise while you work. Talk to yourself. I know this sounds silly, but it can really help. Brainstorm out loud and with other people, and if you're a tactile or kinetic learner, we've got more for you still. You're going to want to pace or go for a walk while you're taking your calls. You want to doodle or write notes while you're listening to other people talk. You want to use a fidget tool or a fidget spinner to stay focused while other people are talking or presenting. You want to take breaks to stretch and move frequently. And you want to ensure that your environment is comfortable and ergonomically correct for your body. And finally, you want to brainstorm while moving your body or doing an unrelated activity. Using the way your brain naturally processes information helps you to better manage your time, to stay productive and focused, and process information more efficiently and with better retention. Let's talk about how work is integrated into our lives. Before technology was ubiquitous, before we had laptops and smartphones, most people worked at work, and when they were at home, they did not really work much. And that's gotten a lot harder over time. Now, the reality is that we can work from pretty much anywhere, as long as we've got internet connection. And because we can, we do. There's an expectation, sometimes real, sometimes perceived, that because we can always be connected, that we should always be connected. That because we can send out an email, someone should be responding to that email. And the reality is that some people thrive in an environment where they're always connected to work. They don't think of working life as separate, but they think of work as part of life, and vice versa. They're comfortable answering work emails on the weekend, and they are comfortable taking a personal call from work. We call these people integrators. Integrators have fully integrated work into their lives, and they don't really see the dividing line. On the other side of things, we have people who really like to separate their work life from the rest of their life. When they're at work, they're working, fully focused. And when they're at home, not thinking about work. We call these people segmenters. Segmenters don't want to think about work at all when they aren't at work. But when they are at work, they're working hard. They aren't getting a haircut in the middle of a workday. But they aren't answering work emails at the dinner table either. Another way to think of segmenters is as compartmentalizers. And now, here's where it gets really interesting. Approximately 70% of people identify as integrators, but only about half of those who want to be integrators. They feel that they will be happier as segmenters, but they just don't know how to make it work. They feel intense pressure to always be on call, to be connected. Most of us are not integrators, not because that's our natural tendency, but because we've let technology and the possibly perceived expectations of others dictate how we are running our lives. Most segmenters are pretty happy as they are. At the end of this lecture, there'll be a slide with some questions to help you figure out whether you identify as an integrator or as a segmenter. And you probably have a pretty good idea already. However, the really important thing to consider, no matter how you identify, is do you really want to be that way? Knowing how you identify and whether that's what you want will help you build a system for maximal productivity. If you're a segmenter, you know that you'll be more productive when you schedule all of your non-work tasks outside of work hours. It probably stresses you out to take a call from your doctor or friend while you're at work. If that's you, you can simply decide that you aren't going to take those calls at work. You take them on your lunch hour or in the evening after work. And because you've made this decision for yourself, you'll be able to stop the guilt about answering right away. If you're an integrator who would rather be a segmenter, there is hope. I know it seems like the decks are stacked against you, but you can and should start to set some boundaries. Around your work, setting these boundaries will help you be more productive, both at work and at home. Let your boss know that in an attempt to be more focused and productive, you are rearranging your schedule a bit. You will plan to not answer email after you leave work for the day. But then, if there's an emergency, of course, you'll pick up the phone. You can put in place boundaries around your vacations and can even start with baby steps by choosing vacations where you won't have access to cell or internet service at all. Probably find it easier to say that you won't be checking email if you actually can't check email. And if you are an integrator who's happy being an integrator, that's great. But be mindful of context switching. Even though you are comfortable integrating your work life with the rest of your life, make sure to match similar items together so that you can decrease the mental toll that context switching takes. If you've got a bunch of personal tasks that need to be done during business hours, no problem. But make sure to schedule them together. Knowing the difference between an integrator and a segmenter and which you are can help you schedule your work in a way that is consistent with your values and lets you get more done at the best times that work best for you. Most of you have heard of extroverts and introverts, and you likely know which one you are. And I want to talk to you about how where you are on the introversion-extroversion scale can affect your productivity. At a base level, extroverts gain energy and recharge by being around other people, and introverts recharge by being alone. Extroverts tend to prefer groups and crowds and open offices, while introverts tend to prefer one-on-one conversations and a bit of privacy at work. And then, of course, there are the ambiverts, who fall somewhere in the middle and can be adaptable in most situations. Now, you might be thinking, What does my personality have to do with my productivity? Well, a huge part of productivity is about energy, and where we fall on the introversion, extroversion spectrum helps us to define from where we are deriving our energy and what drains our energy. Practically speaking, knowing how you can gain and lose energy can help you figure out how to best plan your day for optimal energy and optimal productivity. So let's say you are an extrovert. In order to keep your energy up, you need to talk to people during the day. If you typically find your energy is lagging late in the afternoon, knowing that you are an extrovert allows you to try to schedule meetings or calls where you'll be interacting with others and recharging in the afternoon. If you are an extrovert, you'll also likely want to make sure that you're interacting with people every day. Perhaps you're not the best candidate for working from home regularly, as that may cause your energy to drag and your productivity to go down with it. Now let's say you are an introvert. In order to keep your energy up, you're going to need alone time. You can use this knowledge to make sure that you're scheduling large blocks of heads down work during your day. You're also probably a great candidate for regularly working from home. If you are an introvert, I bet you've heard the following thought: my most productive days are the ones where nobody speaks to me. Now, of course, not speaking to anyone ever is useful, but you can arrange your day so that you're breaking up your meetings with blocks of alone time. And you can try to schedule one-on-ones instead of large group meetings where it makes sense. And you can make sure to avoid days of back-to-back meetings, since you know that those days will be totally drained. And if you're an ambivert, then your productivity really isn't as greatly affected by your interactions with others. For you, a good balance probably makes sense, and you should pay attention to where your current energy levels are and for your energy patterns, and do a little bit of experimenting to find out. If you're feeling low during the day, does it help you to engage with others, or does it help you to be working solo? You might need to track this for a week or so and do some personal A/B testing to figure out what works best for you. Attached to this lecture is a quiz to help you determine where you fall on this spectrum. And next, we'll do an exercise to determine who you are on all the spectrums we've spoken about over the last 2 lectures. That way, you'll be able to use this knowledge throughout the course and throughout your life to tune your systems for optimal productivity. Over the last several lectures, we talked about different personality traits and natural tendencies that can affect our productivity. Now we are going to do an exercise to find out who you are so that you can use that data to your advantage. You might already have a pretty good idea about where you fall on these spectrums, but I often find that people experience a few surprises. So here's what I'd like you to do now. Download the worksheet attached to this lecture. On the worksheet, you'll find links to all the online quizzes I mentioned that will help you determine where your natural tendencies fall. The quizzes take on average about 5 minutes each, and there is some reflection you need to do as well. This activity should take approximately 30 minutes. Once you've downloaded the worksheet, click on the first link, take the quiz, and write down your results. Reflect for a moment. Were the results surprising, or did you already know yourself pretty well? Off the top of your head, what are a few things that you could do, or continue to do, or stop doing that will help you to use this data to allow you to make better use of your time? If you can't think a bunch now, that's okay. Keep this document handy throughout the course, and as you make connections and inferences, you write them down. Once you've completed the process for the first attribute, start on the next one. Remember, the reason we're doing this is that it's much easier to build a productivity system around who you are already than it is to try to make yourself into someone you're not. We've all got natural tendencies. We just need to use them to our advantage instead of to our detriment. Find out who you are so that you can be armed with self-knowledge to positively affect your own productivity. Once this activity is complete, we'll be moving on to talk about all things related to task management. This section, we're going to start getting into the nitty-gritty of task management. Task management is a central component, perhaps the most central component of time management. Task management is all about how we keep track of the stuff we need to get done, and about when we make the time to actually get it done. It's about ensuring that nothing falls through the cracks, and that there is time to get everything done, without scrambling or pulling all-nighters. Time management in many ways is task management. When talking about task management, I think it's first necessary to step back a moment and talk about the philosophy behind it. I want you to think of task management in terms of a single trusted system. You've heard me talk about systems a lot so far. And maybe you're thinking, system? I don't have a system. Or perhaps you're thinking, I've tried so many systems, but none of them work for me. But here's what I want you to know. You'll build a personalized system that works for you. Probably don't fit into any existing system, I'll be honest with you. That's why you're here. And by the end of this course, you'll be empowered with the knowledge to implement your system in whatever format that is. And you'll be empowered with the knowledge to update your system when your circumstances inevitably change. When you have a baby or get a new job or get 10 new direct reports, your circumstances will change, that's for sure. But once you understand the concepts related to creating a single trusted system, you'll be able to iterate on your system to ensure that it's always working for you, regardless of your circumstances. So what is a single trusted system? It's one, and I repeat, one single place where you store all of your tasks, your ideas, your open questions, etc. Having a single trusted system is the best way I've found to be more productive and to reduce stress at the same time. Here's why. Have you ever had the feeling, I'm sure I'm forgetting something? Or what about, how do I know that I'm working on the right thing right now? Or even, I have so many things coming at me in so many directions, I'm super overwhelmed. I can't prioritize. I'm betting you're nodding your head right now. Most people experience these thoughts and feelings daily. These are nebulous, anxiety-producing feelings. You don't know what you've forgotten, but it's something. You've got so much to do, but what's important? Having all of your tasks in a single place allows you to know that you're not forgetting something. It allows you to prioritize, and it allows you to know what you're not getting to. You want to know that if you're not getting to something, it's because it's been properly prioritized below all other things that you're getting done. Having it all in one place allows you to properly prioritize because you have all the data. If you're using your email as a to-do list and voicemail, and you have a paper list somewhere, and you've got notes on your phone and unread Slack messages, you're not able to properly prioritize. You're seeing the trees, but not the forest. This means that not only are you perhaps working on the wrong things, but you're wasting time context switching between these systems all the time. So the easiest way to ensure that nothing falls through the cracks while also reducing stress is to use a single system for all of your tasks. As I just mentioned, tasks come at you from so many sources. If you let these tasks remain in their original sources, it will be very difficult to track the items and it will be nearly impossible to effectively prioritize. Additionally, it's just as important to have a system for your personal life as for your work life. Once you've gotten all your tasks across your whole life into a system, you will not have to spend energy either remembering these things or having them racked through your brain on a constant loop. As personal tasks pop into your head throughout your workday, just simply put them into your system. As work tasks pop up when you're trying to get some sleep, pop them into your system. Using a system ensures you never have to rely on your memory, and it frees up your brain for the actual work that needs to be done and for the task at hand. A system allows you to single task, which is far more effective and efficient than attempting to multitask, which is something that our brains can't actually do. But more on that later in the course. When starting on the journey to become more organized and productive, it's important to remember that the time you spend maintaining your system is far less than the time and energy wasted remembering the same things over and over again. The work it takes to keep your system organized is valuable, and it's real work. Planning saves time in the long run. So how do we create a system that allows us to stop relying on our memory so that we can use our brains to tackle real work in a focused and efficient way and stop stressing? In the next lecture, we're going to be talking about the first step, the brain down. We've talked about why having a single trusted system is so essential to managing both tasks and stress. And we've talked about how you need to aggregate tasks from all of your inputs. One big input avenue is your brain. The very first thing you need to do when creating a system, which also gives you a great sense of relief, is to do a brain dump into your system. A brain dump is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. You are literally getting all of those tasks, all of those lingering open questions, all the projects that you don't yet know, what the steps to, all that stuff out of your head. Getting everything out of your head and into a system is free. Once you do your initial brain dump and then regularly brain dump into your system, you don't have to spend time thinking about the same things over and over. Once it's in the system, your mind knows it can let go. Once it's in the system, it can be prioritized. Once it's in the system, it won't be lost and it won't fall through the cracks. So here's how it works. You sit down with a writing implement, either a pen or a keyboard. You list everything that comes into your head that you need to do, and you add it to your system. It's that simple. Now, initially, there's going to be a lot of stuff circling around your head, and it might feel overwhelming to write it all down. But guess what? It's all there whether you write it down or not. And keeping it in your head is guaranteed to create more stress than looking at it outside of your head. Many people also focus on only the large items. But to get the full value from this technique, you'll need to brain dump all this stuff, no matter how small. So buy my niece a birthday gift and get a haircut belong there with figure out my next career move. In the next exercise, we'll walk through a process for getting the initial brain dump done. But I also want to talk about brain dump as a stress relief strategy. Consistency is important here, so don't just get it all out at once and then forget to do it on a regular basis. Throughout the day, keep a note-taking system. It's a phone, a notebook, a doc, a handy at all times. And if a task or an idea flips through your head, write it down. Then transfer the notes to your system every day. If you start to feel overwhelmed, take a 5-minute brain dump. Before you leave work, take 5 minutes and do a brain dump. Before you go to sleep, take 5 minutes and do a brain dump. You'll be amazed at how much you can accomplish and how much easier it is to focus and stay on task when you're regularly getting tasks out of your heads and into a system. The key to making this work is consistency. It doesn't take a lot of time, but it takes discipline. In our last lecture, we discussed the importance of the brain dump and how to do it at a basic level. Now it's time to get started on your first brain dump. The attached worksheet will walk you through the process. The first thing you should do is to take out a pen and paper, or a document on your computer, a spreadsheet, a notes app on your phone, or you have preferred to do app. Use whatever you are most comfortable with. Later, you'll transfer all of this along with your tasks from your other resources into your system of choice. But for now, the important thing is simply to have a method of getting everything out of your head. First, we'll pick the low-hanging fruit. Think of everything that comes to the top of your head and write it down. If you know off the top of your head the next action for that task, then go ahead and write it down as well. If not, don't worry about it for now. And keep moving. This should feel a bit like a stream of consciousness. When you've gotten to a point where you've written down everything off the top of your head, then we'll dig a little bit deep. You'll think through what you have to do on a daily, a weekly, a monthly, and an annual basis, in both personal and professional. You want to get it all in there. No item is too small. And unanswered questions are tasks. The process will take generally between 30 and 60 minutes, depending on how much you've got going on. Now go forth and start your first comprehensive brain dump. And then remember that this is a strategy that you can use whenever you start to feel overwhelmed. Now that your brain dump is complete, it's time to get started implementing a system by outlining the relevant components. The system is the one single receptacle where you'll keep all of your tasks and projects, where you'll prioritize, where you'll update, and most importantly, where you'll go to determine what you need to do each day. The format of your system is going to be based on personal preference. And while I did say one single system, if you are a segmenter, you might choose one system for home and one for work. That's okay too. Integrators who are happy being integrators often find it easier to have one system that encompasses both work and home tasks. And if you are an integrator who would really prefer to be a segmenter, then having separate systems for work and home can be a good way to start creating boundaries. Going forward in this course, when you speak about a system, we are referring to either of these options. For many people, the system you choose is going to be an app, something that works on both mobile and desktop. Some people may prefer a spreadsheet, and some people prefer paper. All of that is fine. However, if you think that paper is the best method for you, I'm actually going to recommend that you use an electronic system to house everything, and that you use paper on a daily basis to write out your to-dos. In your planner, in your bullet journal, or whatever method works well for you. The reason I recommended this is that if you decide to keep your system in 100% paper, you're going to find it a lot harder to prioritize. You're going to be doing a lot of writing and rewriting, and you're not going to be able to easily sort out your tasks. And it's possible that you'll lose it or misplace it. The horror. So if you like paper, that's fine. But please use it in conjunction with another method for best results. Attached to this lecture is a resource that lists some great apps you can use if you don't have a system in mind already, as well as a link to a basic spreadsheet template for tasks that should do the trick if spreadsheets are your thing. The important thing to remember is this: the system that's easy and convenient for you is the system you should choose. Now let's talk about the components of your system. Whatever system you choose, you'll need to have the following fields: task or project name. You make it as specific as possible. Q1 goals are better than goals. Monthly revenue report is better than reports. Next action. This is really important. This is a step that is most often overlooked, but it really helps to avoid procrastination, and it pushes projects forward. It's easier to procrastinate on something like get more clients than something specific like make a list of people in my network that I can reach out to for referrals. The next action should be concrete and doable. And sometimes it's as simple as block time on calendar to brainstorm about this, or call Melly to ask about X. Then we have the next action date. You'll want to set a next action date. And this is a really important feature that I don't want to gloss over. Some tasks have real deadlines and many don't. Adding arbitrary deadlines to tasks and projects that don't actually have them creates unnecessary anxiety without being truly helpful. The next action date is a different concept altogether. The next action date is when you're going to perform the next action. It's different from the due date, and it's what drives the work forward. This is what allows you to show up in the morning and know this is what I need to do today to meet my goals and deadlines. Also, sometimes you know several next actions for a task or a project. You can enter them all in at once, and sometimes you'll only know the direct next action. That's okay. Due date. Some tasks and projects do have hard deadlines, and of course you're going to want to know what these are. So if something doesn't have a deadline, add it in. If you're using a system that only has one date field, you can also set the due date in the name of the field of the task. But use the date field for your next action date's status. I typically only use 3 statuses: started, in progress, and done. But you might have other workflows depending on your role. So use the statuses that make sense to you. Depending on your system, you could also experiment with color coding. You may also want to have a status for each to be prioritized. This is sort of like your someday maybe list that you can filter out if you need to. And finally, documentation or notes. The documentation or notes field is also really important. This is where you enter a brief note and date each time you perform a next action. By spending 10 seconds making a note about what you did and when you did it, you'll make your future self so happy and productive. Gone will be the days when you think to yourself, when did I leave that message for Joe? Is it time for me to follow up? And you don't have to be searching through your email to check when you sent a message. You may also want to have fields or tags, like category or type, especially if you are using one system for work and personal combined. And if you want to sort your tasks into contexts, buckets, like David Allen suggests in his seminal work, Getting Things Done, or a type of work such as marketing, sales, or logistics, you can use tags as well. You'll also likely notice that I haven't mentioned priority as a field. If it's helpful for you to add a priority field, feel free. However, once you have everything in your system and it's sorted by next action date, I find that priority becomes an unnecessary field, as you've already taken care of that by deciding the next action date. Next, we'll do an activity that will help us to add all the tasks that aren't in our brains into our system. Now that you understand the fundamental components of your system and have done your initial brain dump, it's time to build your comprehensive task list with all of your tasks and projects from all the sources. Now you'll tackle all the other sources from which tasks and projects originate. Other than your head, on the attached worksheet, put a checkmark next to each task or project source that applies to you, and brainstorm if there are any other sources. Then one by one, search each of these sources for tasks and projects and input them into your system. You may find that you already have many of these items on your brain dump list, but you want to make sure that in this first task you don't miss anything else. Depending on how many sources you have and how much stuff you've got hanging out of your source, this process could take anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 or 3 hours. Feel free to take a break between each source. Now that you've got all of these tasks and projects in one place, you need to figure out what the next action is for every task or project, if you haven't done so already. So make sure to set the next action dates and their due dates, where it will go. Just do the best you can. If you have a really trivial, non-urgent item, you can set that data for a month or 2 and make the next action be, figure out what I need to do. Then you set a status for each task or project. And now, here comes the fun part, for me anyway. You sort by next action date, whatever system you're using. You want to be looking at a list of what you have to do today. That's why next action dates are key. Now, you've sorted by next action date. You have a list of what you have to do by next action in date order. Look at what you have to do today and work from that list. Once you perform the next action, then you update the next action field as necessary and change the next action date or close out the task edit. So maybe you send out a proposal and then you change the next action, then follow up on proposal and change the next action date to 3 days from now. Now, you don't need to use your brain to remember when to follow up. I know I'm making it sound easy and it is simple, but like anything worth doing, it takes discipline, and something that I really want you to remember is this: update your system as you perform the tasks, as you do the work. One huge roadblock that a lot of people experience when they first implement a comprehensive task system is that they don't update it as they go. This is problematic for a couple of reasons. It allows faster to document what you're doing when you're doing it, because you're thinking about it and you've just done it, versus waiting until later and then you'll be thinking about it again. And also, if you waited till the end of the day, updating your system becomes yet another thing on your to-do list. The goal is that by the end of the day, the only things left on your to-do list for the day should be the things you didn't get to, if any. Sometimes people say, this system is great, but then I get too busy, then I stop using it. When you're busy, that's actually when you need your system the most, so you can stay on top of everything and make sure that nothing falls through the cracks. So remember, these are the steps you'll take to maintain your system, so that your system is doing the work of remembering and you're doing the work of doing the work. 1. Keep a physical or electronic note system where you can immediately write down any thought or task that you need to do at a later date. As soon as something pops into your head that you need to do, write it down or put it directly into your system. 2. Do a brain note into your note-taking system at the end of the day or several times during the day. 3. At the end of the day, transfer your brain note to actionable tasks in your system. 4. As emails or messages come in that have associated tasks, add those tasks to your system. Do not use email as a separate task list. Resist this. 5. Work directly from your task list during the day so that you can make sure that you're working on what you prioritize and documenting what actions you're taking. Update your tasks as you go, so you don't have to hold that information in your mind. And 6. At the end of every day, update your task lists to reprioritize and reschedule anything you didn't end up getting to today. 7. You'll be able to start fresh the next day with a pre-prioritized task list. This stuff isn't rocket science, but again, as said, takes discipline and practice. Think of a system as an external brain or a hard drive, where you can store stuff and access it when you need it, instead of trying to keep everything in your head. Now that you've learned the basics of creating and maintaining a task system, we're going to talk about prioritization. Wow, you've done a lot of work so far. Congratulations. Now you have a system containing all the stuff on your plate, and you don't have to think about it anymore. It's not swirling around in your head. You don't have to lay in bed trying to fall asleep, but instead thinking about what you didn't get done or what you still need to do. Take a moment to reflect. Do you feel that sense of relief yet? In this section, we're going to be learning all about prioritization. And the first step to being able to effectively prioritize is already complete. You have all the data in one place, your system. And when you sort your system by next action date, you'll then have a list of everything that you need to do today in service of your goals and deadlines. When you have all the data in one place, true prioritization becomes possible because you know everything that you need to do, and you can see it all relative to everything else. When all the data was stuck in those other sources, it was hard to see the forest. You are seeing some trees, but not the big picture, and how everything fits into that picture. With all the data in one place, now we're really going to be able to see to work some magic. Sorting will be much easier, and you'll be able to do a realistic assessment of whether the stuff you've got on your plate is going to fit into the time you've got in your day. You may find that you just have way too much to do, much more than you yourself can accomplish. So one of the first things you want to do is to prioritize the work that is in service of your goals. You'll also want to think back to the first section of this course, regarding how to extricate yourself from those responsibilities that no longer fit into your goals. And you want to think about all the things that you can outsource or delegate. Remember, in order to prioritize effectively, you've got to have all the data in one place, and you need to be thinking about your goals. In order to effectively prioritize, you have to have all the data. However, another key insight you'll get from having all the data in one place is what you're not getting to. This sounds stressful, or maybe even a little scary, I know. But think about it in this way. If you aren't getting to it before, and are not getting to it now, the only thing that has changed is your knowledge of the situation. Knowledge is power. That knowledge will let you do something about it. You'll also have a chance to compare what you are and aren't getting done to your goals. Maybe you've been working on the wrong things. Maybe you could be doing a different subset of tasks. Spending the same time working but actually making progress towards your goals instead of spinning wheels. What you're getting done and what you're not getting done, these are choices, and you have the power to make different decisions if the status quo is not working well for you. Knowing what you're not getting to is just as important as knowing what you're getting to, because it's how you close up those cracks so that nothing can fall through them. And it's how you can determine if how you're spending your time is actually in the service of your goals. If there's stuff that you aren't getting done, there are two questions to ask. 1. Does this have to get done to achieve my goals? If not, consider removing it altogether. And 2, and if so, does it have to be done by me? If not, get help, outsource, delegate. Ask your boss to brainstorm some additional resources. You may feel that ignorance is bliss on some level, but when it comes to productivity and to achieving your goals, ignorance is not bliss. When you prioritize with all the data, you're consciously choosing to do the things that are in service of your goals. And you're ensuring that by default, the things you didn't get to were less important than the things you did do. And with that knowledge often comes a huge sense of relief. You can almost see the anxiety lifting in yourself because you're making decisions. And don't let the day or the week or the month or even the year happen to you. Now we know why having all the data is important and why knowing what you aren't getting to is important. But how do we actually make these prioritization decisions? How do we choose what we need to do today or tomorrow or next week? Sometimes it's obvious. There's a true deadline. That report is due tomorrow. But when you've got a whole lot on your plate, sometimes it can be a bit more unclear. And that's when I find the use of prioritization frameworks to be really helpful. So let's talk about a couple of frameworks that you can use as tools to help you prioritize. First, let's discuss perhaps the most well-known of these frameworks, and that is the Urgent Important Matrix, sometimes known as the Eisenhower box. So you'll see that they have on the vertical axis importance and on the horizontal axis urgent. Let's talk through each of these boxes, starting with the top right and going clockwise. Things that are both high importance and high urgency should be done first. Things that are low importance but high urgency should be delegated as possible to the best person to handle them. Things of low importance and low urgency often shouldn't be done at all. They're often not worth the time. And finally, things of high importance and low urgency should be scheduled as appropriate to their deadlines. Now, I want to show you another framework that is similar but not quite the same, in which I also find very helpful. This one is the Impact Difficulty Matrix. This matrix, we're comparing how hard it's going to be to accomplish something with the impact that the thing will ultimately have on your business or your life. You see that on the vertical axis we have impact, which is sort of like importance, and on the horizontal axis we have difficulty, which is nothing like urgency at all. So this framework is taking other factors into account and is not really worrying about the urgency of an item. Let's talk through each of the boxes, starting with the top right and going clockwise. Things that are high impact and high difficulty often refer to your long-term projects. These are items that are likely going to prioritize and that will likely have many next actions that you'll complete in order for the project or task to be done on time. However, every once in a while, the level of difficulty will outweigh the impact, and then you'll want to reconsider if this is worth it. Things that are low impact and high difficulty are rarely worth the time. These types of tasks should only be prioritized after everything else on your list, and maybe not at all. Things that are low impact and low difficulty are nice to have. These tasks should be completed after your high impact tasks, and perhaps you should consider delegating them. And finally, the high impact and low difficulty tasks are your quick wins. This you should definitely prioritize. I hope you find these frameworks helpful. As you can probably guess, you're not going to print this out and apply them one by one to your tasks. That will make people really burdensome. But now that you're aware that this exists, you can keep them as a mental model and apply them as necessary. They can certainly help you make decisions on certain types of tasks where the correct priority isn't immediately clear. For instance, if you're finding that there are items you keep pushing and never getting to, well, perhaps these are the low urgency, low importance, low impact items. And maybe they should just come off your list instead of dragging you down. Or maybe you need to decide which of the two urgent items need to come first. You can ask yourself which is more important or which will have more impact in order to decide what you'll do first. I've also attached to this lecture a best practice document that goes over all the finer points of prioritization, including these frameworks that you can reference for yourself. I hope you use these prioritization frameworks to help you step outside and above the tasks and projects to see them with perspective so that you can make better decisions on what to work on, when, and feel good about the rationale for these decisions. Getting everything out of your heads and all of other locations where we sort tasks is the first part to learn how to stop relying on our memory and instead rely on the single trusted system that you're building. The next step is to decide when you're going to do the things on your list. In this activity, you'll download the associated worksheet that will walk you through the steps to prioritize your entire list. You'll define next actions for all your tasks and projects, and you'll define the next action dates. As you begin to prioritize in this way, it may be helpful to employ the prioritization frameworks that we talked about earlier. Additionally, if you're not sure when the next date for an item should be, simply put a next action date at some point in the not too distant future. For instance, perhaps the task is to plan a trip to Peru. Something on your someday maybe list. Put a next action date of January 1st of next year and the next action date of decide if I want to do this year. This way, you don't have to worry about losing track of these somedays maybe items, but you also don't need to put a near-term date that isn't realistic. Also, remember that at this stage of the game, you really want to have your system selected so that you can minimize data entry. So whether you're using an app, a spreadsheet, or something else, now is the time to implement that system. It's all coming together now, and I hope you're as excited as I am. In this lecture, we're going to dive a bit deeper and really get into the nitty-gritty of planning out your day using prioritization. At this point, you've used a combination of your deadline, your goals, and the frameworks to get your prioritization in place. And now you're ready to sort your list by next action date and get working on your to-do list, right? Great. So you might find that you have 5 things on your list for today or 25. How do you know what to work on first? I think it's really helpful at this point to apply the following workflow. 1. First, you're going to do the must-its. These are the things that have to happen today, no matter what. This could be that finalized report, the studio boss at noon, or it could be taking out the garbage and recycle booms to the cup because tomorrow is garbage day. 2. Then you want to tackle what I call the quick hits. These are all those little tasks on your list that only take a few minutes each, like following up on a response to an email, returning a phone call or text, submitting your expenses, etc. When you get to this stage, you'll feel a nice little dopamine hit as you start to cross things on your list. C. Productivity is fun and uplifting. 3. Finally, you're going to do whatever's left on your list for today. These are the nice to haves. It would be great if you got to eat today, but if you have to be prioritized for another day, nothing bad is not going to happen. Now, if you're someone who prefers paper, this is the time when I'd suggest you use it. You can look at your to-do list and you can physically write it out in your planner, your notebook, or your bullet journal, the order in which you plan to tackle the items on your to-do list. If you're using an app that has drag and drop capabilities, you can drag the tasks into the order in which you plan to tackle. Now, I can almost feel you jumping out of your stand, wanting to shout, "This will all be great." But my days don't always go as planned. I work with clients who have unexpected needs. I'm subject to my boss' limits. And I hear you. The best laid plans are just that, plans. And plans need to be flexible. And for that reason, I highly suggest the midday prioritization round. Typically, it's best to do this right after lunch, as that's the new point of the day for most people. And you haven't yet gotten back into that full-on work mode. When this point comes, take 10 minutes to look at what's coming in throughout the day and compare it to what's left on your plan for the day. Is anything that came in either more urgent or important than what's on your plan? Did a brand new must-do today arrive in your inbox? If so, incorporate it into your system and apply the workflow we just discussed. Get any new must-do done and then keep working on your list. If the stuff that came in isn't more urgent, important, or impactful than what you had planned, then you can integrate it into your system, putting the next action dates where it makes sense. And now I really hope you're starting to see how this all comes together. If you hadn't done the work to put all the data into a single system and then prioritize that system, then you really have no idea if the stuff that comes in today needs to be prioritized above what you already had, planned or not. Without the data, you're just flying by the seat of your pants, hoping that somehow you get it all done. Now what happens when you get to the end of the day and you didn't quite get everything on your list? First, you can rest assured that what you didn't get to was by definition the least important stuff. Because now you are an expert prioritizer, seeing both the forest and the trees. If someone asks you, why didn't you get to X, Y, or Z? You can tell them it's because you are focusing on A, B, and C, which are more important, impactful, urgent, or all free. So if you don't get to it all today, and let's face it, if you're ambitious, then it's likely you're going to get it all done today. Then the next step is to simply reprioritize your tasks for the next day after when it makes sense. Doesn't make sense to leave the tasks as overdue, as this will just cause unnecessary anxiety. Simply look at your system and reprioritize those tasks back into when they make sense. In the next lecture, we're going to spend a little more time talking about reprioritization and why we should vanish the concept of the overdue task. We've learned how to prioritize your day, but I want to dig a bit deeper now into what happens when you don't accomplish everything that was on your to-do list. And look, this is going to happen a lot. If you are taking this course, you're already someone who I can tell is ambitious. You want to get more done, and you're actually doing something about it. So in all likelihood, what you have put on your list for today is a stretch, and you might not get to it all, and that's okay. A few things to think about. 1. Work expands to fill the time allotted. So if you have a bit more on your plate than you think you can handle, well, that might actually be a good thing. You'll be pushing yourself to accomplish more in a shorter time, and you'll be more likely to do it as a result of the time constraints that you put around your work. 2. Again, remember that if you're prioritizing appropriately, what you didn't get to is by definition the least important stuff that you have to do today. So instead of feeling bad that you didn't get it all done, feel great that you got the important stuff done. Honestly, that's better than most people are doing. And 3, over time and with practice, you'll get better at estimating more realistically what you can accomplish in a day. You'll be aware of how much buffer time you need, you'll be aware of how much time you need to answer incoming emails, and therefore you'll get better at prioritizing what is actually doable. And now that we've got all that touchy-feely stuff out of the way, what you actually do with those tasks that aren't done yet but are still on your to-do list? Well, you go ahead and reprioritize them. You change the next action date to the next action date that makes sense. Maybe that's tomorrow, but maybe some of the stuff that came in today is actually more important for you to do tomorrow than these items that are still hanging out on your to-do list. So you just reprioritize them for later. A system is sort of a living, breathing thing. It isn't static because neither is your work or your life. It needs to be flexible, and most importantly, it needs to reflect real life. The reality is that you didn't get those things done today, and it helps no one to leave them in that anxiety, heightening, often bright red, and with a big exclamation mark state. We can't go back to the past. So leaving something as overdue is unrealistic. It needs to be prioritized for the future to reflect the reality that's when you'll get to it, the future. So please banish the overdue task. Get it out of your head, out of your system. You can only move forward. So do it. Let's talk about one factor that can lead to things still being unfinished at the end of the day and add to a sense of stress, and that is emergencies. This is a question I get asked all the time. How do I handle it when my day is filled with emergencies? Now, the first thing I'll say here is that if you've done the work of getting all the data into your system and prioritizing it appropriately, then you're rarely, if ever, going to be experiencing a self-imposed emergency. You know the kind I'm talking about. You're chatting with your colleague in the kitchen, and then suddenly you remember that you have to get back to that client with a proposal to date in an hour. Well, good news for you. We have done the work in the previous lectures that those types of emergencies are part of your past. So let's assume that you don't have self-imposed memory-related emergencies anymore. Now, what are we dealing with? We're typically dealing with things which seem urgent or are expressed as urgent. Maybe they're coming from your boss or a colleague or a client. In all of these cases, what we perceive as emergencies often aren't. Email is a terrible way to identify tone, and people also don't often include a time frame in their requests, which can make requests seem urgent, even when they're not. So the first thing to do is to check on the timeline. Your response can be as simple as, "Got it. When do you need this by?" Or you can take it a step further and say, "Got it. I should be able to get this to you by Thursday." Will that time work for you? Most of the time, you'll find you have a lot more time than you thought, and you'll be able to prioritize the past appropriately into your system. Emergency resolved. Now, there are cases when the response will be, "I need it in an hour." "Sorry, I need this afternoon." In that case, you're going to do one of three things. 1, if you've already completed all of your must-dos for the day and it's for a client, then you're just going to do it because it has become a brand new must-do for the day, and everything else on your list can be pushed as necessary. 2, if you've still got must-dos on your list and you think you can put this one in, then do it. And 3, if the person who's asking is a colleague or a boss, you might have a bit more leeway to push back than you think. And if you can say something like, "I understand that you need this urgently, but I have X, Y, and Z on my plate that have to be done today. Given the time constraints, I'm wondering if you think it makes sense to prioritize this over X, Y, and Z. Or if there might be someone else who can handle this. I'm open to either option. But I just wanted you to have the full picture and to make sure we're on the same page about what will be delayed if I do this." And remember, the only way you can even have this conversation is because you have all the data and you properly prioritize it. So far, we've talked a lot about how to manage and prioritize everything we have to do now. But what about things that you're not actively working on in the moment. In our next section, we'll turn our focus to planning. Planning is essential. There, I said it. It's so important. It's important not only for your ability to manage your time and to get stuff done, but it's also really important for our mental health. First and foremost, planning saves time. Yes, you have that right. The time that you put into planning saves you time in the long run. People often have a tendency to think that planning is not in your work, or that they don't have time for it. But a little bit of planning goes a long way in terms of using your time efficiently. Let's think back to our single system and how we prioritize our workload so that it happens when it needs to happen. What we're really doing here is front-loading our decisions while planning our work. Let me describe a situation for you that you might find familiar. Get into the office and grab your coffee. Sit down at your desk and open your laptop. Then you spend 10 minutes looking at your list and thinking, what should I focus on today? Decide what to work on, you do it, and then later in the day, you think to yourself, okay, what should I work on now? Planning eliminates all of this. You've already made the decision about when to do what you need to do. So when you sit down to work, all you have to do is start plugging right away. No more wasted moments interrupting your day. Now let's talk about planning at a bit of a higher level. When you set your goals, you can plan out what you need to do to achieve those goals. And you can break it down into steps you need to do and when you need to do them. In the active planning, you may see some potential pitfalls and you'll have the opportunity to course correct before you even start working. You won't go down as many wrong paths and you'd have as many false starts. You're effectively separating the high-level thinking from the doing, which allows you to do the doing more efficiently. Studies have shown that when you plan, you accomplish the goal or project about 20% faster than you would have if you didn't spend that time planning upfront. And you run into fewer obstacles along the way. Now, I hear you saying, but I'm not a planner. Planning stresses me out. I like to be spontaneous and live in the moment. I'm going to ask you to challenge yourself on the belief that you're not a planner. Plans can be flexible. In fact, they're meant to be flexible. Think of the plan as the default, but the default can change. Often people view planning as cumbersome and then feel stressed. And like the planning itself is a waste if we can't stick with the plan. I view planning as 1, time saving in the long run, and 2, a source of freedom. On the first point, if you spend 10 minutes today planning out what you need to do tomorrow, or 30 minutes this weekend planning out your week, you're going to save hours over the following day or week. While planning, you're thinking about all the things that you need to do at once and prioritizing appropriately. Then you're able to spend the next day or the next week executing instead of thinking over and over about what you need to do. However, I think the most important point that I want to make here is that having a plan can actually provide freedom. As long as you view your plan as flexible guide instead of a master, planning actually provides relief from stress. In fact, there was a recent study that showed that planning is as effective as deep breathing and meditation for relieving stress. You may be surprised by this, but I wasn't at all. A plan provides freedom from anxiety because you know what you need to do. Freedom from wasting time because you spend your time acting instead of rehearsing. And freedom from overthinking because you freed up your brain space by putting everything you need to do in your plan. Planning is what lets you be flexible and spontaneous without feeling stressed. Let's talk about your planning mindset. Why do people typically not spend as much time planning as they ought to? Most people view planning as not real work or something extra that they have to do on top of the work that they already have to do. Planning does take time for sure, but planning saves far more time than it takes. In order to be an effective planner, you might need a little bit of a mindset shift. I want you to think of planning as real work, maybe the most important one. It's not something you do if you have time, because let's face it, you won't. It's something that you have to make time for, and it's something that you should do first. Planning is definitely real work, and it's important to plan to plan. I know that sounds silly, but it's true. You have to make time to plan. You can deviate from your plan, but you need to approach planning as the real and important work that it is. So this lecture is short and sweet. Planning is real work. It's not something extra, it's part of your job, and it should be part of your life. And when you plan, you'll be able to get more of what you want to get done. Next, we'll discuss how to actually make time for planning so that your days go smoother and that you accomplish more. We've talked about the importance of planning, and we've talked about why you should consider planning to be real work. But now, let's talk about how you actually do it. I often hear people talk about planning their day in the morning, but I actually think that planning at the end of the day is much more effective and a better stress reducer, and it allows you to have a real downtime in the evenings and on weekends. It's really simple to do, but again, it takes commitment and discipline. Spending 10 minutes at the end of each day, and I like to do this at the end of the workday, is a key habit which will allow you to both get the day and week started, because your system will already be properly prioritized. You can truly disconnect and recharge when you stop working for the evening or weekend. If everything is in your system, then you won't be spinning out about it at home or when you're trying to fall asleep. You'll feel calm and collected because your system is complete. Everything is prioritized and you no longer have to keep it all in your head. You'll be able to be present for whatever you do when you're not at work. So how do we do it? The first thing to do is to make sure to schedule time on your calendar to do this planning, as it won't happen if you leave it up to chance. Remember, work expands to fill time allotted. So if you think I'll get to this by the end of the day, but then you don't schedule it, it's very unlikely to happen. Next, you're going to follow these steps. 1. Schedule 10 to 15 minutes of time on your calendar every day for end of day prep as a recurring appointment. So if you typically leave the office at 6, then schedule this for 5:45. If you tend to leave the office at varying times, you can always drag and drop the appointment around on your calendar as it makes sense. 2. When you get to the appointment time, review your notes from the day on your notes app or your notebook or whatever you're using and then add them to your system. 3. Do a quick brain dump into your system. 4. Reprioritize any tasks that you didn't get to today. 5. Check your calendar to make sure that what's on the docket for tomorrow still works with the time you have allotted. So if you have 5 meetings tomorrow, you're probably not going to be able to make much headway on that big project. 6. Then you can leave work with a clear head, ready to tackle your other responsibilities or just have fun. Spending 10 minutes at the end of the day reviewing your task list and reprioritizing sets you up for success tomorrow. It ensures that you don't need to spend any time at all wondering what you should do first or deciding what to work on. You've already prioritized and you can hit the groundwork. Now you know how to end each day, but let's learn a little further ahead. Let's talk about end of week planning. End of week planning is very similar to end of day planning, but it allows you to take a broader view of your schedule and workload for the week ahead to set yourself up for success. This end of week prep takes slightly longer, but you'll feel so much better prepared for the week ahead, and you'll be able to disconnect and truly recharge over the weekend. Disconnecting, taking a true project, has been shown to improve both creativity and productivity. So not only does this type of planning allow you to plan your workload in a realistic way, but you're also improving your creativity. So how do we do end of week planning? First, expand your Friday recurring end of day appointments to be 23 minutes. Second, then do all the normal steps of the end of day planning. Third, review your system for the following week. Do you have 35 tasks scheduled for Monday and only 5 for Tuesday? Move some of those around so that you have a realistic plan for next week based on the actual time that you have during each day. Do you have back-to-back meetings all day, Wednesday? Well, realistically, all you're going to be able to do is check your email. So make sure that you don't have any tasks scheduled for that day. In short, ensure the workload on each day makes sense, given the time you have, and move next action dates accordingly to ensure that you have a realistic plan for next week. Fourth, you may also consider time blocking out the major projects and tasks so that you know when during the day you'll be able to tackle them. 5. And last but not least, truly disconnect and enjoy your weekend. Bask in the glory of your fully prioritized system. Feel completely ready for next week. Now that we know the importance of end of day and end of week planning, let's do an activity to actually make it happen. Let's put what you've learned about end of day and end of week planning into practice. It's easy, will only take 2 minutes. Here's what I want you to do. Open up your calendar, create a recurring 15-minute appointment called EOD planning, starting 15 minutes before you typically stop working Monday through Thursday, or whatever the first 4 days of your work you got. Then create a 30-minute recurring appointment. Call it EOW planning, starting 30 minutes before you typically stop working on Friday, or whatever the last day of the work week is. That's it. Great work. Now you are committing to making time to plan, so your day and weeks go a bit more smoothly, so that you accomplish more of what you set out to do, and so that you are able to disconnect from work and truly recharge. We've learned about tactical daily and weekly planning, and we set ourselves up for success by actually scheduling time on our calendar to do that planning. Now we're going to talk about a different type of planning, goal planning. Some of our goals are work goals, and we may or may not be defining these ourselves, depending on our level in the organization or in our role. But even when a goal is handed down to you from on high, you still need to do some planning to make sure that you'll actually achieve it. And some of our goals may be personal goals or work goals that you define yourself. In all of these cases, simply knowing what the goal is not enough. You've got to plan in order to make it happen. Let's take a very straightforward goal. Let's say you want to run a marathon, but you've only ever run a 5K. Are you just going to keep your normal running schedule and hope for the best? No. You're going to come up with a plan that allows you to build strength and stamina over time. You're going to break down that goal into milestones, and you're going to work backwards from the race date to determine the pace at which you need to meet these milestones. Then you're going to break it down even further to determine how far and on which days you're going to run each week until you reach that race date. Now, you can apply the same methodology to any goal. Most people tend to do goal planning on annual or quarterly basis, but it's not enough to know that you have a big moving goal out there 3 months or even 12 months away. Once you've set your goals, work with them one by one, determine the deadline, and then break down the time you have remaining between now and your deadline. What are the intermittent milestones that you need to hit? Now break that down even further. What do you need to do to reach each of those milestones? What are the actual actions you'll need to take? And how much time do you need to set aside? Now that you have a plan, add these tasks along with the next actions into your system so that the work can be prioritized in the rest of your workload. In the next activity, we'll practice by setting a goal and making a goal plan. Now that we've talked about goal planning at a high level, let's do an exercise to show you how to use SMART goal framework and to break your goals to steps that will allow you to achieve them. This exercise should take about 10 minutes. Download the worksheet and take a moment to think about a current goal that you have or even a new one. Pause the video if you need a while to think about it. Now, if you've got a goal, you're going to define it more fully using the SMART framework. Here's how. First, think to yourself, is my goal specific? And here's what we mean by this. You don't want a goal that says increase revenue. You want a goal that says increase revenue by 50% over the next year. Make it specific. That's what the S stands for. Now, is your goal measurable? In this example, yes, you're measuring your goal based on percentage increase over the next year. M stands for measurable. You've got to have a way to know if when you've achieved your goal now, is it attainable? That's the A. If every year in the past you've only increased revenue by 5%, 50% it might not be attainable. Now is the time to adjust and make sure that your goal is realistic and achievable. It can be a stretch and it should be, but it shouldn't be so far out there that you can't imagine succeeding. Next, is it relevant? Why did you choose this goal? If you're in sales, then a sales goal makes sense. But if you're an engineer, does a sales goal make sense for you? Probably not. Make sure that your goal is relevant to your work or your life. R is for relevant. You want this to be a goal worth working towards. And finally, pick a date by which you'll achieve this goal. If it's a sales goal, that we're using as an example, then perhaps end of the year is a good time frame. The T is for time bound. Once you've got your goal defined, then you can break it down into milestones. What are the midpoints that you'll need to achieve to make sure that you're making progress? If it's a sales goal, perhaps you need to enter quarterly sales goals as milestones. In the worksheet, I've included space for 5 milestones, but you might have more or less, depending on how big your goal is. Now that you've defined your milestones, how are you going to get there? What actions are you going to take? In the sales goal example, maybe you need to be making X number of calls per day or per week. If you are an artist and you're trying to get a big piece done, maybe it's a number of hours that you need to work on in each day. And finally, once you're done, you have the steps you need to incorporate the goal into your system. Add the project or task, whatever works for you, and make sure the next actions are defined. Ta-da! You have a goal, and you have a realistic, specific plan to achieve it. Now, it's up to you to do the work. Now, I'd like to move on to how to hone your ability to focus and how to reduce and even eliminate the distractions that we face that mess with our ability to focus. The very first thing that I want to talk about with regards to focus is the concept of single tasking. Now, I'm sure you've heard of multitasking. This is a word that's mentioned all the time as a way to get things done, but multitasking is a total myth. When we multitask, all we're really doing is switching very quickly between different tasks. Our brains are not actually able to do multiple things at once in this way, and multitasking is actually detrimental to both our actual productivity and to our mental health. Attempting to multitask depletes our ability to focus. It depletes our willpower, and it is much less effective in focusing on one thing at a time. I think deep down, you know that multitasking doesn't work, and it's also very stressful. So what do you do instead of multitasking? You single task, of course. You focus on one thing at a time, and you knock that thing off your list. And then you move on to the next thing. Have a single trusted system that you've properly prioritized, just like you learned to create in this course, is what allows you to single task. When you single task, you actually accomplish your task much faster and with greater accuracy. Additionally, the whole process will feel controlled instead of scattered and stressful. One of my favorite quotes is, "To do two things at once is to do neither." Try focusing on one thing at a time and see how much more you can accomplish and how calm you feel. Single tasking is essential to being productive and reducing stress. And you might be thinking, yeah, that sounds great, but part of the reason that I'm always multitasking, even if I don't mean to, is that I'm easily distracted. In this lecture, we're going to talk about some of the things that you can do to minimize those distractions that are a part of modern office life. I find that there are 3 main sources of distractions: other people, someone tapping on the shoulder or office background, conversation, ourselves when we stop mid-sentence in a document to go check our email, and technology, the addictive pull and the constant memes and feeds. I want to give you some real strategies that you can implement for eliminating those pesky distractions that we all know can derail our day if we're not careful. Distractions are killing our productivity, and we have to be proactive if we want to change that. First, as I mentioned before, technology is amazing in so many ways, but it's also designed to grab as much of our attention as it can get via the default settings. If we want to be in control of our technology instead of it controlling us, then we need to be proactive about those settings. So what can we do? First, turn off all those app notifications on your phone, except those that you really need, which are usually text and meeting notifications. You can also turn off desktop notifications. You want to answer an email or message on your own schedule, not just because you got to be on one. Yes, of course, you still need to be responsive, but you can check your email every few hours and check Slack maybe every 30 minutes and still be responsive to your coworkers. It's only recently when there was even a possibility of being immediately responsive, and in most cases, while it seems into the culture as an implicit expectation, it's not actually necessary. Additionally, consider turning the ringer off on your phone while you're engaged in deep focused activities. You can even turn on the Do Not Disturb. And if you're worried about missing a real emergency call, you can set up emergency bypass to allow only specific numbers like your spouse or your kid's school to get through. Another really simple technique is just to move your phone out of your line of sight. Put it in a bag as best, and if you can't do that, then face down on your desk. In order to help avoid these unintentional internet rabbit holes, when you sit down at your desk to do something specific and somehow it's 45 minutes later, you're totally up to speed on Reddit, but you didn't actually do the thing you intended to do. You can do something really simple, which is to set your browser homepage to something boring, like the search engine of your choice. This will allow you to avoid that tempting clickbait on your browser homepage. To avoid inadvertently going down the information rabbit hole on your phone, you can move these really tempting apps to a folder that you label something like Time Sucks or Think Twice, and move that folder a few swipes in on your phone. The simple act of making it just more than one click or swipe away provides just enough of a buffer to make you think twice and avoid mindlessly accessing those addictive things. And don't worry, I'm not saying you should never move these apps again. I'm just suggesting that it's a good idea to do it mindfully. You want to be in control of when and for how long you are accessing these sites and apps, instead of the other way around. And these are ways we can help ourselves limit our usage without actually giving it up altogether. To enter the more physical realm, let's think for a minute about your environment. If you've ever heard the saying, outer order, inner calm, you'll know that working in a clean environment, clear of clutter, reduces anxiety and encourages focus and creativity. So one quick thing you can do to promote focus is simply to clear off your desk and workspace. This doesn't take much. Even simply stacking up all those papers and putting them in a pile in the corner can help. Studies have shown that clear and cluttered spaces also reduce cortisol, the fight or flight hormone, which means that we're actually much better able to calmly focus on our work. If you work in an office or a home office that has a door, shut it when you need to do your defocus work. Or if you work in an open office, try to find a slightly secluded space or a chair and turn it around so that you're facing a window or a wall. Finally, if you work in an office with others and need to focus, wear headphones or earbuds. Even if you aren't listening to anything at all, no one will know. Headphones are the universal signal for "don't bother me." I hope you found these strategies helpful and that a few of them have resonated with you. I've also attached a document here that you can download to get into some of these focus hacks in detail. Coming up next, we'll have an activity that will help you determine the distractions that affect you most and help you come up with an action plan to reduce them so that you can focus better and use your time more effectively. In our last lecture, we learned about typical distractors and many strategies that you can employ in order to help take control of our focus and minimize distractions. In this activity, I want you to think about which types of distractions that you struggle with most. Do you struggle by letting yourself get distracted by informational rabbit holes? Do the constant pinging of Slack distract you all day long? Maybe it's really hard for you to focus when there's a lot of background noise. Think back to earlier today or even last week. When did you find yourself being distracted or annoyed? Which is a common response to distraction. Once you have time to think, then select from the options on the worksheet attached to this lecture or write in your own. Then commit to implementing your plan within the next week to limit those distractions. Doing this will provide you with a clear plan of action to experiment with reducing distractions. This activity should take between 5 and 10 minutes to complete, unless you get distracted. Time blocking is a strategy that you may have heard of already. I want to talk about how it helps us to focus, be realistic about workload, and therefore make progress on our goals. At its core, time blocking allows us to overlay our tasks and our calendar to make sure that we have the time to do what we set out to do and to ensure that we aren't setting ourselves up for failure. Time blocking is simply using a calendar to block up time when you work on a particular task. a batch of tasks, or a project. Time blocking works under the premise that if it's not scheduled, it won't happen. Or as some say, what can happen at any time often happens at no time. Time blocking also helps us to have a bit of more self-awareness and to improve our time estimation skills. It's a great way to keep yourself accountable and to look back and see how you've been spending your time. Time blocking also allows us to ensure our workload and the expectations we're setting with others are actually realistic. For instance, if you've got a day with 6 meetings, the reality is that you will likely only have time for checking email or handling ad hoc requests that day versus spending deep focused time on a project. Time blocking can also help you keep commitments and set boundaries. Psychologically, our brains are used to showing up for what's on our calendar. So if you block out what you're going to do and when you're going to do it on your calendar, it's sort of like a way of tricking our brains into just doing it instead of procrastinating. In terms of setting boundaries, time blocking can help us to remember to process email only a few times a day, to do our end of day and end of week planning, and actually stop working at the end of the day. So tactically, how do we do this? First, you'll determine how you want a time block. There are a few options that work well. If you're using an electronic calendar like Google Calendar, you can simply create an additional calendar called time blocking or tasks and overlay it on your main calendar. This way, your time blocking calendar remains private to you, and it also ensures that your calendar is not showing you as 100% busy to other people, so they can still book appointments with you if needed. If you don't have the option to overlay calendars but would still like to use an electronic calendar, you can simply add private appointments that show free to others. And if you are a person who likes using paper, you can block out your tasks and projects directly into your bullet journal, your date planner, your notebook, or whatever works best for you. Once you've got your method worked out, you can start blocking. Review your task list and work out on your calendar to work on tasks and projects. Look at a task system to see what you need to do in a given time frame, and you'll schedule blocks of time to work on those tasks or projects. Do your best to estimate the time blocking ticket, complete tasks or projects, or simply schedule blocks of time and get to as much as you can in each block. During these time blocks, commit to not checking email, Slack, or any other systems that are likely to distract you. Additionally, make sure that you are building a buffer time to account for unscheduled interruptions or daily organizing tasks. You can consider scheduling 30-minute blocks or a few times a day for checking email, and you can also schedule blocks for light tasks. So for instance, if you've got a whole bunch of documents to review, you will schedule a block for a document review instead of trying to schedule each individual task separately. Likewise, you can block time for what I call quick tasks, which are all those things that we have every day. They take between 2 and 10 minutes. Following up with people, making quick phone calls, etc. And finally, make sure that you schedule travel time in your calendar. I think that all have those situations where we have an off-site meeting. It starts at noon and someone sees that we're free from 11 to noon. So they schedule a meeting on our calendar, leaving us with no time to get to our meeting and forcing us to reschedule one or both of those meetings. Try to employ the technique of time blocking to be realistic about your workload and to remain focused and moving forward throughout the day. Let's learn about documentation in all of its forms and why it's important and relevant to time management. First, it's important to keep track of our thoughts and ideas and our questions in writing. Again, we don't want to rely on memory. When you keep a note-taking system, your phone, a doc, a notebook with you, you can think of it like meditating. If you have a thought about that something while you're working on something else, write it down. Don't get distracted. Just write it down and keep on doing what you're doing. At the end of the day, during your end-of-day planning, you can incorporate your notes into your system. Some of them will be action items. Some will be notes on current tasks or projects. Some will be resolved by the end of the day, if they don't need to be transferred at all. Next, it's important to document the tasks and projects you're working on as you're working on them. If you take 10 seconds to notate on your task, but you left the message for someone on a specific date, then later you don't need to try to recall that information or search for when you sent that email. It's another example of how taking a couple of extra seconds on the front end in the moment saves tons of time overall. It also helps you build a habit of keeping your tasks system current. One big hindrance a lot of people experience when they try to start a comprehensive task system is that they don't update them on the moment. And then updating the system itself becomes yet another task they have to do. So if you're working from your prioritized task list, when you complete a next action, take 10 seconds to note the date and the action you took. Then update the next action field if necessary and change the next action date. No need for worry here, just a quick sure hand that will jog your memory and be meaningful to you. For instance, an entry could be LM for Sophia about the meeting. This would mean I called and left a message for Sophia about the meeting we are organizing. But I also understand that may take time to build this habit. Just like planning is real work, that's important. So is documentation. Documentation is a huge part of what allows us to avoid relying on our memory, so that we can better focus on the task at hand. In the moment, task documentation is clearly important, but there are other types of documentation as well. Process documentation and training documentation. For process documentation, you are again simply removing the requirement for storing the steps of any process in your brain, so that your brain can truly focus on the task at hand. Any process for multiple steps will be completed more than once, should be documented with a process or a checklist. Process documentation ensures that you don't miss any steps, and it ensures that people are doing things in the same way. Without process documentations, mistakes will be made and it should take time and effort to clean them up. And the third type of important documentation is training documentation. If you are in a position of work where you are responsible for training others, you'll find this hugely helpful. People in a job should document the components of that job and how to perform it. This way, when you expand your team or when employees terminate, you can get new employees up to speed, quickly saving time for yourself and the organization. Creating training documentation can seem like a huge task, but it doesn't have to be. If you document while you're doing your task or project, it will be much easier to produce complete documentation than if you attempt to do it after the task. And once you have the training documentation in place, you can have a new employee use the documentation, find holes and discrepancies, and clarify and update the documentation so that it's always in a best possible state for new employees. Included with this lecture is a downloadable best practice document that breaks down these three types of important documentation. Documenting tasks as you go saves time and allows you to focus on the task at hand. Process and training documentation also save you time in the long run by ensuring these steps aren't missed and you don't have to hold all this information in your head, which allows you and others to execute more quickly and accurately. Now, we're going to talk about something that might sound counterintuitive, but it's very important for time management and productivity: breaks and rewards. Studies have shown that the most productive people are actively engaged in work for an average of 52 minutes before taking a 17-minute break. Breaks allow us to recharge and they act as rewards. In this lecture, we'll talk about two main types of breaks: those that we take during the workday and the time you take to disconnect when you're not at work. First, let's talk about the breaks and rewards within our workday. In the past lecture, we've talked about not allowing yourself to be distracted by Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or your site of choice when you're working. However, this does not mean that you should never access these sites. Breaks are important to our mental health, and taking short breaks acts as a reward for all that focus, deep, not distracted work that you're now capable of. So after you've completed a block of work for a batch of tasks, by all means, give yourself a 5-minute break of checking your preferred social media site. Likewise, you don't want to walk in the kitchen anymore. However, after you finish that big report, give yourself a 10-minute break to take a real walk around the block. You'll reset your head, recharge, and be ready to start on your next task with the gusto. Taking breaks that feel good have the added benefit of allowing us to disconnect and recharge for greater focus and creativity. Intentional, time-bound breaks increase productivity, meaning that they are good use of our time as long as we are intentional about it. Now that we've talked about breaks within the workday, I also want to talk about the importance of disconnecting from work. when we are not at work. We have competing goals in our lives. Work isn't the only one. To be present at work, you also need to be able to be present at home, and vice versa. Truly disconnecting from work can help us to feel more at ease and on top of both environments. As we become a more connected world, the demands for work start to creep into areas of life that weren't physically possible in previous eras. We now have laptops, smartphones, smartwatches, etc. The ability to remain always tethered to work does not mean that it's always the right thing to do. In fact, truly disconnecting from work has benefits that are far-reaching and positively affect both our work lives and our home lives, and help us become better employees. Segmenters already know this and actively work towards this. Integrators sometimes have trouble with this concept, and they don't want to disconnect as frequently or as thoroughly as segmenters. But they usually do find value in this concept as well. Some of the proven benefits of disconnecting from work on a regular basis to recharge include 1. Providing your brain with time to think, which increases our ability to make creative connections and problem solve in the background. 2. Allowing ourselves time to focus on our relationships. When we have positive relationships, we are less stressed, and avoiding stress allows us to foster good relationships at work too. It's an example of a virtuous cycle. 3. Performance has been proven to increase after breaks of any duration. 4. Taking short breaks from the computer reduces eye strain. 5. Studies have shown that time off increases productivity, and the short breaks increase focus and energy. Taking short breaks at work seems pretty achievable to most people. Disconnecting from work for a longer period in the evening, the weekend, even a full vacation can seem unattainable at first. So how can we make it happen? One of the first things you can do is to set boundaries early. If your work culture is such that most people work on evenings and weekends, discuss with your manager that you prefer not to be on call during non-work hours, and that you don't plan to check emails or work on evenings or weekends. And let them know why, explaining the science-backed benefits that we just discussed. Let people know that if they do need you for something urgent on evenings or weekends, they should call you instead. You can also choose a stopping time each day and stick to it. Don't check emails after this time. Segmenters or integrators who prefer to be segmenters should leave their laptop at work if possible. Integrators might feel better about having a specific time that they check after work emails. Knowing your end time in advance forces you to be more productive during the day. Another key thing is to make sure that you take your vacation time, all of it. Put an out-of-office reply in your email and your voicemail, stating that you'll be out of the office and you won't have access to email. Make sure to include the contact info for the person who will be responsible while you are away. If this is hard, consider taking a vacation where it's actually not possible to check email, like camping where there is no self-service or maybe a cruise. I've attached a document here that dives into the details for how to prepare for and return from a vacation so that you can be able to truly disconnect. You've earned your vacation and you should take it, just as if you earned all those little breaks and rewards throughout the day. Next, we'll do an activity that will help you come up with a menu of the types of breaks that work best for you, so that you can take intentional breaks that feel like rewards throughout the day. In this activity, which will take less than 5 minutes, you're going to choose the types of breaks that will feel like a reward to you from the checklist on the attached worksheet. You can also add your own. Then you can use this list as a menu to choose from each time you want to take a break during the day. By using this menu, you'll be mindful of the types of breaks that you take, and thus you'll be using your time in a way that is consistent with your goals and values, even when you're taking breaks. In this lecture, we're going to learn about a very specific technique for focus, and one that employs the use of breaks specifically. So let's talk about Pomodoro. This technique is named for an Italian tomato timer. Pomodoro is a super simple technique and quite a popular one, so you may have heard of it before. However, in my experience, it's often misunderstood. I'd like to take a pretty liberal view of how we can use Pomodoro. So here is how it works. You're going to select a task, a project, or a batch of tasks. Then you're going to set a timer for 25 minutes. That's your Pomodoro. Work on the task uninterrupted until the timer goes off. Again, just like meditation, keep your notebook or note-taking app next to you. And if a thought pops up in your head during the Pomodoro, just write it down and keep on moving. When the timer dings, you take a 5-minute break. Then you repeat the steps above. After 4 Pomodoros, take a longer 15 or 20-minute break. Sounds simple, right? Now, why is the Pomodoro often misunderstood? I think that people often think that they have to block out the whole day using Pomodoro. But in most people's lives and jobs, breaking your day, all day, every day, in the 25-minute chunks, is it not really reasonable? If that works well for you, great. But if it doesn't, here are some of the ways that I think the Pomodoro can be really useful, not only for focus, but also for reducing procrastination. 1. Doing tasks that you are dreading. It's only 25 minutes. You can do anything for 25 minutes, and it's okay to stop after one Pomodoro. 2. Doing batches of like tasks. So answering emails, doing your digital filing. This reduces context switching and all the negative consequences that go with it. And 3. Working on a big project without feeling stuck or overwhelmed. Pomodoro is a tool that you can have in your arsenal. Just like any other, it's a great way to beat procrastination. And sometimes you can even find that after the timer goes off, you're still on the flow that you want to keep on working. Focus beast that you've become. And if that's the case, lean into it. In the upcoming activity, you'll come up with a list of tasks and projects on your plate that you can apply to the Pomodoro Technique too. In the last lecture, we learned about the Pomodoro Technique. In this activity, you'll use the attached worksheet to come up with a list of tasks and projects in your plate. In the categories that we discussed in the last lecture, where you think you can apply the Pomodoro Technique. As a bonus, schedule blocks of time on your calendar to focus on these tasks using the Pomodoro. Plan is to spend 5 to 10 minutes on the activity. As we're reaching the conclusion of this course, I want to leave you with two of my favorite rules: 2-minute rule and a 1-touch rule. Perhaps the simplest and my favorite tip of all time is the 2-minute rule. What does this mean? If it's going to take less than 2 minutes, just do it now. A little paper comes across your desk, file it. If you see a mess on the floor, clean it up. If you get an invitation, RSVP. Following the 2-minute rule allows you to keep your system in check. If it takes less than 2 minutes, it's not worth putting in the system, and it's not worth thinking about it again. Just do it now, check it out, and don't think about it for one more second. That doesn't mean you should let yourself be distracted and interrupted by these things. Just jot them down, and when you get to the end of your work block or at the end of the day, when you're transferring your actual notes into your system, just do this. You'll be amazed how much more productive you feel, and by how much relief you get, by simply not having these little things hanging over your head. The second is the 1-touch rule. What this means is that for all incoming items, you only want to touch them once. Specifically, this applies to emails, text, and mail or paper. Anything that's coming at you in your virtual or physical inbox. With the 1-touch rule, your aim is to only touch an incoming item once. If you don't have time to fully respond to emails, don't even read them until you have time. You'll only be distracted when thinking about them, but unable to take action. If a piece of paper comes across your desk, handle it once and move on. I'll tell you a little story, something that happens to people many times a day, and it helps explain why the 1-touch rule is so powerful. So imagine this: you click on an email, you've read it, and you decide that you're not quite ready to respond. You mark it as unread, and then in an hour, you open it up again. You reread it, and you decide, you're still not ready to respond. Now, it's near the end of the day. You open it again, you read it for yet a third time, and finally you shoot off a response. This was one email. It could have taken 2 minutes of your time if you just touched it once. You said you read it 3 times and it was in the back of your head all day long, sitting on your subconscious and pulling from your focus. The 1-touch rule is amazing, not only for time management but also for stress and anxiety. And there you have it. These 2 rules are super easy to implement, and by using them, you'll see immediate improvement in your time management. That's why they're my favorite. Congratulations! You come to the end of this course on time management. I hope you've had fun, learned a ton, and are ready to go for it and implement your new skills. You're now armed with the entire toolbox of strategies, techniques, tips, and tools to help you use your time wisely, efficiently, and in a way that's reflective of your goals and your values. These invaluable skills can be applied to your life as it is now, and you can also pick and choose from this vast menu as your circumstances in life change, so that you always have a personalized productivity system that works for you. Throughout this course, you've learned how to say yes and no to the right things. You've You've learned how to combat the most common pitfalls of productivity. You've learned how your personal traits and tendencies can affect your productivity. And you've learned how to build systems that work with those strengths instead of against them. You've got the tools to build and manage a comprehensive task system so that nothing will fall through the cracks. And you've learned how to prioritize that system. And finally, you've learned how to focus on the items that you've prioritized. You have the skills now, and I know you can go out into the world and achieve your goals because you've learned how to be in control of your time and the most important asset we have in life. So what's next for you? I hope that you create a system of choice, if you haven't already, and implement a single trusted system right away. You can use the prioritization frameworks you learn to make sure that you're putting the right task first. You'll incorporate end-of-day planning and end-of-week planning into your schedule, and make sure that you start each new day and week ready to go. You'll also focus on staying focused, minimizing distractions and time blocking, and taking breaks to ensure that you complete the work that you need to do in an efficient way. Lastly, keep the 2-minute and 1-touch rules in your mind to help you along the way. If you haven't already, please rate and review this course and let me know what you thought. Thanks so much for taking this course. I may be biased, but I think you've used your time wisely. Thanks for tuning in to today's video. If you found these tips helpful in boosting your efficiency, don't forget to hit that subscribe button below. For those of you looking to take your game to the next level, consider checking out the resources in the description to unlock exclusive strategies tailored just for you. And before you go, make sure to check out the next video on our channel for even more insights and techniques to supercharge your efficiency. Remember, with the right tools and mindset, you can achieve anything you set your mind to. Until next time, stay focused and stay productive.